About fertilization, development of the embryo and fetus, and we'll see where we get to. Well, I'll start from the beginning for this slide. I know. So, female reproductive system, we have two ovaries, one on the left side, one on the right side, for and they release estrogen, female sex hormone, and also for releasing eggs. Again, the thing to remember that's different between males and females, that males always produce new sperm cells. Females have all the eggs they'll ever have from birth. So don't make any new eggs, they just mature generally one at a time during ovulation. Those eggs are released from the ovary and start traveling into the fallopian tube or oviduct. That's also where they can be fertilized. So if that egg is going to be fertilized, the sperm cells need to make their way all the way up into the fallopian tube to do that. And that's why they need those fluids and nutrients to be able to reach the egg in the fallopian tube. The fallopian tube leads to the uterus, sort of hollow muscular organ that is going to hold the fetus if the woman becomes pregnant. The baby doesn't grow inside of the mother's stomach. Okay, that's in place with hydrochloric acid and digestive enzymes. It wouldn't be very good for a little embryo. But it grows in the uterus.
When it grows, does it like push on the stomach?
Yeah, I mean, as a woman gets pregnant, as she gets farther along, as the baby grows larger, it does. It pushes lots of her internal organs around. So sometimes she can be, especially at the end of her pregnancy, she can be very uncomfortable. She has to go to the bathroom all the time because it compresses her bladder. All those sorts of things. You get heartburn because it's pushing your stomach up in her abdomen. So yeah, all sorts of things get pushed around as that fetus grows. No. No, it doesn't grow that much. But everything's pretty, we may think everything has to be in a certain place, but stuff, all of our organs inside, they can move around a little bit. There's some room for them to move. So the uterus is what holds the embryo and the fetus as it grows. And so this is where we left off. And then the opening of the uterus. There has to be an opening in the uterus for two reasons. Because sperm needs to swim through there to fertilize the egg, and also the fetus during birth needs to leave the uterus, and it moves through the cervix. Cervix is the opening of the uterus. Connects the uterus to the vagina.
Wait, does it get bigger?
Yeah, and so if you have heard about, if you've known somebody that's pregnant or watched on TV, when a woman's in labor, the doctor will check and say how far she's dilated. You heard that term?
Yeah, I heard that.
And that term means the doctor checks her cervix. And the cervix needs to, when a woman's pregnant, it's closed completely. But when she's about ready to have the baby very soon, it's been dilated to about 10 centimeters or so. And then part of her labor and her getting contractions and hurting, part of that is the cervix dilating and opening up to allow the baby to come out. That's when they say that she's dilated, that's what they're talking about. Is the cervix, how far open is the cervix?
What if the baby's too big? How do they cut the stomach open and get into the uterus and not
Well, I'll show you a video of that later on. But basically, in a C-section, it's basically they cut through her lower abdomen. So to get at the baby, they need to cut through her skin, obviously. They need to cut through then her abdominal muscles. Even below that is, then you have the uterus is underneath there. They cut through the uterus, and that's where the baby is. There's the amniotic sac in there. They would rupture the amniotic sac, and then they take the baby out through that incision. You mean if you're pregnant again later on? Yeah. What's that? No, you can give vaginal birth. If you have a C-section, most of the time a woman would also have another C-section if she has other babies. But they can sometimes have a natural childbirth, a vaginal birth afterwards. It's not as easy, or it's a little bit more complicated, but it can be done. So, but oftentimes a woman, if she's had one C-section and she's pregnant again, they'll just automatically sort of schedule her for another C-section. Because sometimes that incision where the uterus was cut and all that stuff is a little more fragile after it's healed, so it may be more difficult.
What is a C-section?
It's just it's a procedure. So sometimes, so Dean asked if the baby's too big. Sometimes the baby's not being born. Sometimes the baby's in distress. It's not getting enough oxygen. It's moving through the birth canal very slowly. There may be other problems, and so they can't wait for the baby to be born, or the baby's not going to be able to be born vaginally through the vagina. So instead, because of these problems, they may have to get the baby out very quickly, and they may do a C-section where they just cut through her skin and her uterus and take the baby out through this incision rather than it being born
Do you
vaginally.
cut the umbilical cord too?
Yeah,
So it comes out of your stomach, or do you cut it?
in the C-section, they take the placenta and umbilical cord out with after the fetus. During a normal birth, during a vaginal birth, after the baby's born, the umbilical cord and the placenta come out as well. We'll talk about that later on. Save your childbirth questions for a few slides from now. This childbirth. All right. So the cervix is the opening of the uterus to allow the fetus out, and that leads to the vagina, or sometimes called birth canal, where both the baby is born, the fetus is born by being pushed out through the vagina, or it's also where sperm are deposited to go fertilize the egg. Yep, sperm has to travel from the vagina, through the cervix, through the uterus, all the way up into the fallopian tube in order to reach the egg to fertilize it.
But didn't you say it's closed?
When she's pregnant, it's closed. But when a woman's not pregnant, it's open a little bit so that sperm can travel through there. All right, any questions about female reproductive system? So just a different view. 2 ovaries, uterus, cervix, and vagina. We'll skip Moby and Wick for right now.
No.
I like
Wait, is that a whole video?
All right, so like we talked about in male, estrogen is the female sex hormone produced in the ovaries. And estrogen's similar to testosterone in that it's a hormone that's responsible for the development of secondary sex characteristics. Secondary sex characteristics like a higher voice, wider hips, breast development. Those are all secondary sex characteristics in females, like facial hair and more muscle tone, more than that. What's that? In males. All right, so the ovaries, like we said, contain all the eggs really that a woman will ever have. They don't make any more eggs. Around 400 or so, sort of depends.
Oh, wait. Didn't you say yesterday around several hundred?
Yeah. Several means multiple
Several
hundred.
is not
Doesn't mean 7.
Seven's not
Oh,
7. There's a difference.
I know, I was just used to be confused about that when I was a kid. That's not 7. So after puberty, then these eggs that were just sitting there in the ovary, they start to grow. They start to mature one at a time usually, sometimes more than one at a time, but usually one at a time. And they're then released once every 30 days or so. What's that called when an egg is released? Ovulation. So the release of an egg into the fallopian tube is called ovulation. And after a woman ovulates is when she can become pregnant, because that egg is there in the fallopian tube.
Isn't there like only like 2 days that she's like fertile?
Probably more than 2 days, but a woman is only fertile in a portion of her menstrual cycle. Once that egg is released, but that egg takes a little while to travel through the fallopian tube. It takes a little while for the sperm cells to reach it. The sperm cells can live for a little while in the reproductive tract. So there's kind of like a window within her reproductive cycle when she can get pregnant. In fact, they have a test, with like a urine test, what women can do if they want to get pregnant. They can take this urine test and find out exactly the day they're ovulating so they can try and get pregnant. I don't know, I imagine it's pretty accurate. The egg cell that's released from the ovary is one of the largest cells in the body. Now if you look up here, the egg cell is many thousands of times larger than the sperm cell. So the egg is the female sex cell. It's released into the oviduct or the fallopian tube. We use those two terms interchangeably.
Oh, wait.
And that is where fertilization occurs. In order for the woman to become pregnant, the egg needs to be fertilized in the fallopian tube. Yeah, so I mean, if that egg cell if it gets all the way through the fallopian tube and gets into the uterus, and then the sperm contact it, she's not going to get pregnant. It's matured too far, and it's just, the timing isn't right.
I have to know this. You know there's like two-tailed sperm, like an infected sperm? Well, is it possible that it can be the one to fertilize the egg?
With two tails, probably not, because it's not going to swim efficiently. So basically, the first sperm cell to reach the egg is the one that fertilizes it.
Oh, wait, Mr. Bureau.
Most of them, 99%, never get to the egg.
There's only like 50 left.
What do you mean? 50 once they actually reach the egg? Yeah. So most of them don't ever make it. Tiny percentage make it. And even when they do, and we'll talk about this, only one can actually fertilize the eggs.
What if two get in it at the same time?
That
Exactly.
okay, so if they happen to, so there is a change in the egg as soon as it's fertilized by one. But let's say it could, two sperm cells happen to get in there at the same time. Does anyone
Twins.
know what the problem is at?
No.
No?
It'll be Siamese twins.
Nope.
Would it be like developed or something?
It would never develop, and there's a reason, and we talked about this a little bit yesterday.
Yeah.
There we go. Because how many?
26. 23.
23 chromosomes from one sperm cell, 23 from the other, and 23 from the egg equals 69 sperm cells. That's the incorrect number. And
23 plus 23 doesn't equal 6.
no, and 23 in the egg cell.
Oh.
So that's the wrong number. When an embryo happens to be formed with a vastly different number of chromosomes, it just can't grow. There are, for example, Down syndrome is caused by having one extra chromosome. So if a person is born with one extra 21st chromosome, that's what Down syndrome is. And having that one extra chromosome leads to a variety of physical and mental disabilities.
What if they had like one short?
And sometimes, so most of the time, if it's anything really, there's other genetic chromosomal diseases, like trisomy 13 is when there's an extra 13th chromosome. There's things like Klinefelter syndrome or Turner syndrome, when there's an extra X or Y chromosome. But once you go beyond one extra, most of the time, for most of those, it just doesn't grow. The embryo doesn't develop anymore. So nobody's ever born with 7 extra chromosomes because that egg never grows after that.
Yes. Is it possible that someone could be born a male? Is it possible that someone could be born a male and a female?
Yes.
Really?
What?
Sometimes people are born. Isaiah,
Yes.
you asked the question.
I
A
know.
serious answer?
I didn't
Okay.
think that was possible.
It is possible. Sometimes people are born
Oh.
with both male and female reproductive organs.
How would they reproduce?
They can't generally. A person that's born like that is generally not fertile and can't have children. What usually happens is often the doctor, in consultation with the parents, will decide at birth, when they see that this is a situation and the baby's born with both reproductive parts, is decide either of removing the male parts or closing up the female parts and then sort of raising that child as a male or female, however they decide. And sometimes when you hear stories about people that were in that situation, they were born like that, but they feel like their parents picked the wrong choice for them. That they parents may have decided that, and they may have removed the male parts, but when that person grows up, they feel like a male, and so some people would say that the parents should not do anything. Just let the child, grow up naturally, and then if they make that decision when they're an adult that they want to have something done, then they can make that decision. But It's just it's rare, but it does happen.
It's kind of weird growing up as like a
Zoe?
cyborg.
Determination.
Didn't they say that like before, like you're like if you were gonna be a boy, you were a girl first, and like then it just like develops? Or...
Well, I mean, it's determined at fertilization. Whether the embryo is a boy or a girl is determined right when it's fertilized. Because some sperm cells are male sperm cells, some are female. If a male sperm cell fertilizes the egg, then it's going to be a boy. If the female sperm cell fertilizes the egg, it's going to be a girl. But there are sometimes complications to that. All right. So fertilization is the name for when the sperm and egg cell actually meet, and they form what we call a fertilized egg cell. Is called a zygote. The chromosomes of the sperm cell
Is a zebra and a goat.
combine with the chromosomes of the egg cell, bringing it to the proper number, 46, and then it's an embryo. They start off as a zygote, and then it starts to divide. It starts off as one cell, then it splits into 2 cells, and 4, and 8, and so on. That process, takes it from a zygote to an embryo. Also, the fallopian tubes have cilia in them. Remember, like we talked about with the pyramids and these tiny little hair-like things, and they sort of move the egg down through the fallopian tube, so it doesn't just stay in one place. They sort of move it down, pedal it down the fallopian tube into the uterus. And eventually, what happens is that egg cell, if it's fertilized, makes its way through the fallopian tube. Along the way, it's dividing into 2 cells and 4 and 8. And by the time it reaches the uterus, it's like a little cluster of cells. And it moves into the uterus, and then it attaches to the side of the uterus. The lining of the uterus is thickened with blood vessels and tissue to allow that embryo to stick there and begin growing. Okay? Yes?
Okay, so it's pretty stupid, but like it's possible. So when the zygote goes onto the uterine wall with all the blood vessels, and it absorbs the blood, right? Or like it,
Not so much absorbs the blood.
okay, well I was gonna say, is that like how it gets blood in its body while it's developing?
No. It makes its own blood cells once it starts forming bones and so on. But where it attaches to the lining of the uterus is where the placenta forms. Yes, Rocco?
Okay, so if fertilized egg is coming down,
Yep.
what if somehow it goes off course and just comes out to it just comes out, it doesn't even
Here?
No, just comes out.
Out of the woman's body?
Yeah.
Well, we'll get there next.
Is it possible?
So if the egg is not fertilized, if it didn't get fertilized up here, then it doesn't attach to the lining of the uterus. There's a change that happens when it is fertilized that allows it to sort of stick into the wall of the uterus. If it's not fertilized, then it just leaves her body along with the lining of the uterus. So after time goes by, if no embryo has been implanted, the lining, the inside of the uterus, which was thickened to get ready for this embryo to implant, if nothing implants there, it starts to break down. It starts to sort of disintegrate. And that is what the menstrual period is. It's that lining of the uterus sort of breaks off from the inside of the uterus. The egg that was never fertilized, along with the lining of the uterus, comes out. And that's what, when a woman gets her period, that's what it is. The removal of that uterus lining.
That wasn't the question. It was if
That
it's
was Dean's
fertilized.
question. No, that was your question. So if that egg came through and never attached,
Yeah.
then she would get her period and would leave her body along with the lining of the uterus. It still would leave her body. Because it never implanted, nothing would happen to her.
But does it happen?
Sometimes. Also, there are instances when the egg, the embryo, implants somewhere where it shouldn't. Sometimes it implants in the fallopian tube. And that's a bad situation. In that case, it's called an ectopic pregnancy, and the doctor has to remove it,
Is it just
because if it doesn't, then the woman could die from that if it went to full term. Because it would rupture her fallopian tubes, yeah. So if the egg happens to implant somewhere where it shouldn't, like in the fallopian tubes, generally the doctor would have to go in and remove that.
What is that miscarriage?
No, miscarriage is slightly different. Miscarriage would be when that embryo is implanted and for some reason didn't grow properly or didn't implant well, and then it doesn't live and therefore comes out of her body. Hold on.
The lining,
Yes.
does that come out too?
Yes.
What if like the person didn't know the fertilized egg like went on the fallopian tube and then like she kept on like releasing eggs and then they like clogged up.
Well, they don't, because once she stops. So once a woman is pregnant, she stops releasing eggs. And that's why. How does a woman? What's one of the first signs she knows she's pregnant? She doesn't have a period, and that's because once that egg has implanted, then she can't get her period, because if the lining of the uterus breaks off, then that embryo is gone as well. So once that implants, then she doesn't get her period anymore, and she won't get it for the entire time she's pregnant, and even for a while afterwards, she probably still won't continue to get her period. Once she does, that's sort of the sign that now she could become pregnant again. That's it?
In like the commercials and everything, they always say, like if you take this pill, your monthly period can stop. And you said you only get a period, like when the sperm or the zygote goes into the wrong tube or whatever.
No. If it doesn't get fertilized and doesn't implant, then a woman gets her period every month.
Every month, just for one time,
Just for one period of time while that lining is being broken down. Yeah.
Oh, that makes sense.
All right. Does Mr. Lalonde answer this many questions?
Yeah, I don't know why we even learn about this questions.
All right, go ahead, Dean. Problem.
Okay. So do girls ever like stop having their periods, or like
What if they're like sensitive?
Yes. A woman does stop having a period. It's called, it makes sense what it means, menopause. You know, pause, like menstrual cycle. Her menstrual cycle eventually stops. So what that means is, hold on. So what that means is she's most likely stopped releasing eggs, and she stopped her menstrual cycle because now that lining of the uterus is not being thickened, getting ready for this egg each month, and so eventually her menstrual cycle stops completely. After it's completely stopped, she can't become pregnant.
why?
Because she's not, it just does. The hormone levels of estrogen, and there's like 4 hormones that control the menstrual cycle, they change over time as a woman ages, and so generally the estrogen levels drop off, and that's when she reaches menopause. It just happens. Zoe?
What if you're like an older woman or something and you have like estrogen pills or something like that?
Yeah.
Would you take those and then you become pregnant, or what, like when you?
Usually not. So sometimes when a woman reaches menopause, then there's several side effects that go along with that, and she may get hot flashes and other things may happen. And so sometimes a woman will take estrogen pills to replace some of the estrogen that she's lost after menopause to help her feel better during that time. But generally it's not going to be enough to restart her menstrual cycle, reproductive cycle. I don't know, they could, I guess. Isaiah?
When an egg matures, like when it's matured, if you have the baby young,
I mean early, they had the baby too soon?
That's probably why.
Let's say,
If the mother is young?
no, if the mom is old, would the baby look exactly the same as it would if she had it when she was like 22?
Yeah, I mean, as a woman gets older, the risk of certain problems with pregnancy increases as the mother's age increases. For example, Down syndrome is one they always talk about, is that as a woman, as both parents, as the mother and as the father get older, the chances of having a child with Down syndrome increase. The chances of having a preterm labor, having labor too early increases. So there's a variety of things that the older the woman is, the more risk factors there are for various things. Joey?
Okay, so you know the Duggar family. How do they have that many kids? That's like crazy.
Are they all? They're all like natural kids.
Is it Oscar
Kids.
They're not like all twins and triplets and stuff.
Oh, they're twins, I think.
Alright, but anyway, a woman could have, so if you work out the math, if a woman starts having children fairly young, she can have a child. Obviously it takes, 10 months or so. She can have that child. It takes another month or two before she's fertile again. And then if she had another child, basically she could probably have a child every year. So in 20 years of your, if she starts when she's 20, and she's having babies till she's 40 or 45, she could have 20 or 25.
Just have like every kid 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
Alright,
7, 8, 9.
Rocco, seriously?
They have like 20 kids or something.
Quick.
If I can realize egg, because they paid you
If, alright, so, a couple things. Guys, listen. So, Rocco's question. Sometimes a woman, so for various reasons, there's things like ovarian cancer or uterine cancer that sometimes a woman would have to have her ovaries removed, just like a man might have a prostate gland removed if they got cancer. That's one situation. And sometimes that happens. They might have to have ovaries or even uterus removed. But sometimes a woman can have the procedure that's basically equivalent to a vasectomy, which we talked about yesterday, which is called tubal ligation, when basically they cut the fallopian tubes up here, seal off the ends, and now it's just like, sort of like a vasectomy in a man. Now, when the woman releases those egg cells, they can't make their way down into the uterus, sperm cells can't reach them, and therefore they can't get fertilized, and therefore she can't get pregnant.
They just keep going on.
No, those eggs, if they're not fertilized, they just break down pretty quickly. She probably will still continue to get her period after the ligation, I think.
Okay, so now, how would a woman tell if an egg that's fertilized gets stuck in the clit? How would she know?
I should probably have, well, she may know before an ultrasound. An ultrasound they can use to look at how the baby's developing, but probably as that embryo grew, she'd probably start to feel some like pain because it's pretty quickly going to outgrow the size of the fallopian tube because it's pretty narrow. All right, can we finish this slide?
Yes.
All right, thank you. The uterus opens to the cervix, which is connected to the vagina.
That was.
Mr. Durox, where did they come up with the name?
I don't know where they were doing. No, we're not done. All right. Oh, this is a good one. So.
What is that?
Want to see the transition?
Oh, shit.
All right. So this is all about what you guys were just asking, all these questions. So this is what happens. So we have the ovary. This is in the ovary, these tiny little dots. This is all showing different time periods. Generally, these little dots are the immature eggs. And inside of the ovary, there's, like we said, 400 of these little immature eggs all throughout there. But then as a woman starts getting her menstrual cycle, as it goes along, they start to slowly grow. One of these egg cells starts to mature, and it forms what's called a follicle. And so it's a little bubble sort of inside of the ovary, and inside that bubble, this little purple thing, that's the egg cell itself. It's in a little bubble, that's the follicle. It makes its way sort of to the edge of the ovary, and then at ovulation, it breaks open and releases this egg cell into the fallopian tube. After that, the follicle breaks down, but is releasing hormones. There's several hormones that control all this. There's FSH, there's LH, there's estrogen and progesterone. There's all these hormone levels that change up and down throughout a reproductive cycle that regulate all this. So that egg is released into the fallopian tube and starts traveling down. Now this diagram is showing what happens if it's fertilized. So what you see here, you can see the sperm cells here have fertilized it. Okay? And so once one sperm cell enters that egg cell, there's an immediate change into the membrane of that egg, and it gets sealed off to any other sperm cells. So as soon as one sperm cell enters that egg, it basically gets sealed off to be sure no other sperm cells get in there. Because again, you only want 46 chromosomes. they usually don't. But John was asking, what if by chance they happen to arrive at the exact same time? That generally doesn't happen. And so that once that happens, then we call it a zygote. It's a fertilized egg cell. That zygote starts to divide, first into 2 cells. As it's moving along through this fallopian tube, it divides again into, each of those divide into 4 cells and 8 cells. It forms what's called the marula stage. That means blackberries in Latin. There's a little cluster of cells that looks kind of like a little blackberry. Then those cells start to grow and starts to become hollow like a tennis ball. And there's an indentation. Okay? That's called the blastocyst. Eventually it makes its way here into the uterus about 8 days later and sticks into the side, into the lining of the uterus. And it attaches, and this is where it's going to stay for 40 weeks as it grows into an embryo and into a fetus and until it's born. That's called implantation when it attaches to the lining.
Besides like the lining and the uterus, like is there any like liquid or something?
No, not really. Once the baby develops, it'll grow an amniotic sac filled with liquid, but inside the uterus, no, it's not. There's not like filled with liquid.
Is the backside view or like the front side? Wait, that's the uterus, isn't it? Like,
Well, I mean, it's really sealed. It's like a balloon. It's in this way. It's like they cut it in half so you can see inside it, but really it's like a hollow, kind of like a hollow balloon.
is this like, but like, is the uterus on like both sides?
It's in the middle. It's right in the so there's an ovary on each side, fallopian tubes on each side, which lead to the uterus, which is in the middle. Right. So if this was a woman, there would be an ovary here, and the uterus right in the middle. All right.
Are you related to John?
Yes.
What?
My cousin.
He's lying. He's lying.
Right?
No, no.
John, am I lying?
Yeah, yes, with John.
No, he's not.
I swear.
My father and John's mother are first cousins. No,
No. Aren't you?
no.
Yeah, I'm
Your father.
Yes, your father.
Your father and my father are first cousins. I believe. First cousin or second cousin. Anyway, whatever. So here we have a different view of the female reproductive system. This is a side view. So it looks a little bit different. You can only see one ovary here. But we have the ovary. Go ahead, draw the lines there.
I'm not sure.
Draw a line.
Draw because we have like gray
It's in
pencils.
black
Just
and
do it.
white.
You
so
can
I'm
do it.
supposed to see.
It's attached to the fallopian tube, which leads to the uterus.
Can't even see this.
Is this all we're doing right here?
Opens into the cervix. The bottom of the uterus is the cervix. It's just this opening at the very end.
What'd you just say?
What? So in terms of other organs, the bladder is just in front of this whole thing. That's the bladder. It's just in front of the uterus. It's also why when a woman gets pregnant after the baby's growing, she feels like maybe she has to go to the bathroom all the time because the growing embryo pushes on her bladder, making it a lot smaller than it was when she wasn't pregnant. The opening of the cervix leading to the vagina. The urethra leaves the bladder and exits the body. The pubic bone is a part of the pelvis in the front. And then in the back is the rectum.
You're really don't change
Is this the end now?
The rectum
No,
is the
you're
end of the
shot
rectum. What?
How long does this happen?
Well, you got it in front of you. What are you telling me? I guess we done there. Yeah. Another question? What?
This is it. Baby's born. Are still attached, right? I thought this is this father.
Hanging out there like.